This is the Troll Patrol, live with Justin FREAKIN.
Welcome to the Troll Patrol, live. You know it's a fun time if we're on in the middle of the goddamn day. Last night during the show, we were wondering, will they, won't they, about Russia invading Ukraine. Apparently, Russia invaded Ukraine. We got about 30 minutes until old Joe Biden gets wheeled out and gives us a speech. Goddamn, I lost my straw for my coffee. Hold on. Fucking wild morning I've had. They came in here, tore out my entire HVAC system. They've been hammering, drilling, sawing through my walls. The cats have been going nuts. That's what I've been dealing with. I hope everybody else's morning's going better. They are lucky I was awake. I'm usually not awake at 9 o'clock in the fucking morning. But I was this morning. Cause I'm not a nice guy when I wake up. Twitch, glad to see you, Twitch. You survived last night's stream. Glad you're still here with us. Hopefully we can survive another day. That the groiper's getting to us. Oh, fuck. Saw a live shot from Kiev. Looks pretty peaceful. Saw a different live shot from Russia. It looked very white. They like fluorescent lights in Russia for some reason. This is the Washington Post live feed right now. See what they're talking about.
That the death toll could be as high as 50,000 Ukrainians that would be dead and wounded. And, you know, really that's a estimate by them, and nobody really knows because we've been waiting to see what sort of...
Originally, Biden was supposed to speak about 15, 20 minutes ago. They've moved that back to 12:45 Eastern Time.
12 or 13 hours, we've started to get some clues about how this is going to unfold. The fact that we're seeing these ballistic and cruise missiles being striked, the fact that we're seeing forces push in from Belarus close to Kyiv, the fact that, you know, you've had this intense attack that Isabel was just describing on Kharkiv, really does suggest that the worst could be ahead of us. So the story that we wrote yesterday looked at what the human toll of this could be. And
I'm not high enough for this shit.
You know, as there's been this intense diplomacy happening in recent months, we just wanted to make sure that people were...
Not high, period. There's been people in my apartment.
Really could be experiencing civilians in any war situation are going to suffer, and how this potentially could be different than some of the conflicts that we've been focused on in the last 20 years, the counterinsurgency.
I've had my tray hidden.
Missy, you've just been at a press conference with the Ukrainian ambassador. What can you tell us about what she said?
Sure. We heard from Ambassador Markarova, who is Ukraine's ambassador in Washington, and she really had a message of defiance as she addressed reporters here in Washington. She promised that Ukrainians will resist. She acknowledged the possibility that that Russia is attempting or will attempt to decapitate the Ukrainian government. But she said that President Zelensky remains in Ukraine, that he intends to continue governing.
There has been a lot of talk about, you know, whether this is a full-scale takeover of Ukraine, that they want the Ukraine to act like a satellite state.
So she also had a message of
like Belarus
for outside powers to continue
with a puppet president.
We're seeing some new sanctions being announced from Europe.
Other people are saying they just want to annex places that are sympathetic to Russia into Russia.
Thinks that it's important, just like we've heard from leaders in Kyiv, it's important as this enters a new phase for the military support to continue to the Ukrainian government. It's, remember,
no matter what the issue is, my position is the same. It is none of the United States' business.
So anything that they can get from the West is going to be really important.
So, Missy, what is the Pentagon reaction today? Talk to us a bit about, opportunities or responsibilities that the United States has at this point.
Exactly. So what we heard from senior defense officials who were briefing reporters over at the Pentagon today was...
So if you're just joining us, we're about 25 minutes away from President Biden speaking.
So it is this three-pronged attack, including this...
I would assume it's going to be a short speech. 10, 20 minutes. Probably will not take
at this stage
questions from reporters. He might.
Sites, command and control sites, and we don't really know how what the impact of that is just yet. But what the Pentagon is saying is that they're going to take under consideration whether the United States needs to take further measures to reinforce its posture and then the NATO posture in Eastern Europe. Remember, the Pentagon said, I think it was earlier this week, that they were going to move additional forces from Germany to Eastern Europe, and they're placing some F-35s in Eastern Europe. And certainly there's the possibility of more of that to come. But again, with the caveat that the Biden administration does not intend to send forces into Ukraine itself.
You reported with our colleague John Hudson a couple of days ago about this, essentially a kill list, or a list of people that the Russian government...
Which I'm thinking is U.S. propaganda.
...to kill or put into camps in an invasion. This was a letter that you reported was sent to the United
States. A lot of this is murky. Like, apparently the U.S. was behind this whole
verify its significance.
Nazi uprising, and we were funding Nazis in Ukraine.
The U.S. government is saying they have information or intelligence to suggest that Russian forces...
I'm sure part of our proxy war against Russia.
Of journalists, potentially political activists, members...
Russia is claiming that Ukraine is pulling a genocide
or for violence
with no evidence.
Being sent to camps is what the letter said. And that was a letter that was sent from a senior U.S. diplomat based in Geneva, in Vienna, excuse me, to
we got a Socrates here next to us.
It was an indication of the level of urgency from the Biden administration, and also, I think, an attempt to draw attention, going back to the human toll of this whole situation, the vulnerability of Ukrainians and what this could mean if either Russia takes over as an occupier or if they install a pro-Kremlin government. It's suffice it to look at the human rights situation in Russia.
I mean, that would be my, like, if they're going to do anything, they're going to install a puppet president.
If Russia does have greater influence in Ukraine. All right, Missy Ryan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you talking with us. Let's go back to James Hohmann.
But also, I'm just a stupid fucking American that knows nothing about the situation
in Ukraine. James, there seemed to be this disconnect between what...
I probably know more about it than the average American, but that's not saying much.
Blinken, and what...
I'm still incredibly ignorant when it comes to...
Ukraine was thinking would happen on the ground there.
The issues going on.
Really this worst-case scenario that had been laid out by U.S. intelligence.
With Russia and Ukraine.
And we're being very careful with what we share with viewers, only information that we really can confirm, either with eyewitness accounts or photo evidence. Obviously, there's a lot of disinformation from Russia.
So you're not quoting the State Department, is what you're saying.
Than they were in 2014 when Putin annexed Crimea and basically moved into Luhansk and Donetsk. But they're still a much smaller conventional army than Russia. You can see how large Russia is. It's the second largest military in the world, behind the United States, larger than China's. Putin has invested tens and tens of billions of dollars into modernizing the Russian military. And where Ukraine remains particularly weak, potentially its Achilles heel, is in its...
I don't know shit about shit.
And it does seem, from the initial opening hours of this attack, that
I agree with that statement. I don't know shit about shit.
That the Russians...
That's what the Troll Patrol is about, finding out the shit about shit.
...abilities that they have, and that Russia is really leaning...
And getting high!
...airborne forces to insert troops into the ground because Ukraine doesn't have the
Insert troops into the
other
ground.
countries do to shoot their planes out of the sky.
It's still cold over there. I don't know if you're going to be inserting any troops into the ground. It's still fucking frozen.
About the size of the state of Texas. If you put the eastern part of Ukraine, you know, we're obviously just heard from Isabel and Kharkiv.
But apparently that's one of the things with this invasion is that the timing has to be perfect.
In Chicago. So it is
Because you want the ground to be as hard as possible. You want it to be as cold
not to mention countless
as it
battalions,
gets,
in the Black Sea,
so that your tanks
to be
don't
able
get
to take a country this large.
stuck in the muck and mire.
Let's talk about the messaging that President Putin is giving and what he was saying in the early hours this morning, Russia time, Ukraine time, last night for us here on the East Coast of the United States. Let's talk about his messaging, both the tone of it as well as some of the rhetoric he's using. And then
Yeah, I got off the troll patrol last night, and apparently all hell had already broke loose. I'm like, I'm not dealing with this shit. I'm going to go play video games.
Really 3 times this week from Putin, and each of his presentations have been unhinged in different ways. We first heard from him on Monday, then there was this meeting that he had with his National Security Council where he basically pretended like it was an open question about whether they were going to move in. And then there was this speech that was delivered at 5:45 a.m. Moscow time, and it really was really striking. Putin kind of went from being really subdued,
That this morning?
angry, and basically in this declaration of war, Putin reiterated this argument that Ukraine isn't a real country, that it doesn't have a right to exist, that it belongs in the Russian Empire. And it's a pretty startling statement. Putin has said it before. Last July, he penned a 5,000-word essay that basically said Ukraine isn't a real country, and Nikita
That essay is wild.
wrong to recognize it, and that Mikhail Gorbachev was wrong to allow Ukraine to have an independence referendum in 1991. And essentially what Putin is saying is that Ukraine belongs to Russia. So when you hear Russian propaganda
Eterna Noctis.
they have no intention of occupying the
Interesting.
country, they're saying that because they believe that Ukraine is part of Russia. It's a preposterous claim. It really has little to no historic merit, but that is the argument that they're making.
Oh, it's
And
a
when you
game.
make that argument, Libby, it becomes especially scary for the a dozen other
A Metroidvania style game. Ooh, I like those an awful lot.
republics, including the Baltic states, which are right here: Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The same arguments Putin is making to say that Ukraine should be part of Russia would also apply to these countries. Those 3 countries, much smaller than Ukraine, but they are members of NATO, so the United States would have a treaty obligation to defend them if they were attacked.
James, what are you going to be watching in the next 24 hours? Night has fallen in Ukraine. Talk to us about sort of concerns as well as sort of areas to focus on.
Well, we're going to continue.
I'm not usually into the frustratingly difficult,
I mentioned a few minutes ago, Libby, that the Russians do
but I like a
get
challenge.
control of the airfields, which makes sense.
That's a fine balance. Like
Ukraine really
everybody's raving about Elden Ring, but like that probably is a little too frustrating for
may
me.
try to get full control
Because I tend to play video games later on at night when I'm stupid high. I'm already tired,
Port of Odessa.
so I'm not
But this is
hitting on all
vital
cylinders.
port because this is actually an incredibly
like
rich
Neo and
area of soil,
Bloodborne and
lots of
shit.
fertile
Like
land, and it's
couldn't get into them.
port for wheat in the world. A lot of the world's wheat comes through the Odessa port. Putin already controls all of this land. He already controls Crimea. He has dozens of submarines and destroyers here in the Black Sea. And so you could see an airborne assault on Odessa. And if they seized control of the port and the airport, essentially they control southern Ukraine, and then they could move forces up further. We've seen a lot of movement in the east and in the north. Obviously, Kyiv is the biggest prize, but this is the area that I'm watching to see if there's any movement. Also, the Pinsk marshes up here. Russia announced that they were doing these 10-day military exercises with Belarus. Those were supposed to end over the weekend. Then they announced that they were extending them. They've moved a lot of Iskander-2 ballistic missiles that are all along here, in which they could really launch a lot of strikes. This is the part of the country that is more aligned toward Europe, but this could allow them to bring forces on both sides of Kyiv. See here, this waterway, it's the Dnieper River. It's really the dividing line between eastern and western Ukraine. And it's a pretty big river. On the western side of the river is where the parliament is. It's where Zelensky's offices are. And a lot of the population of the city's on the eastern edge. So we're going to be watching really carefully to see how and to what extent Russia encircles Kyiv for what President Biden has said is a potential sack of this city, again, of nearly 4 million people. For context, the DC metro area is only around 5.5 million people. So major undertaking, but those are the areas that I'm watching in the coming hours. And
props to this Washington Post reporter. He did a good job of explaining that.
Continue to maneuver and to operate at night. They can use the ballistic missiles to really weaken a lot of the Ukrainian.
Because the further you get into this area, the more sympathetic they are to Russia. What's up, RB? Weed. I don't mind if I do.
For President Biden to speak in about an hour's time. James, you've given us some context and reminded us of the size of some of these cities that are being attacked. Give us some perspective, James, on what this means to see Russia.
In about an hour's time, they pushed it back.
To see a European country, face this.
Biden was supposed to speak in about 15 minutes.
They
have now pushed that back to 1:30 Eastern time, apparently.
War that we've seen in Europe since 1945. It's bigger than any of the.
I guess we're going to be here for a little bit. Doc's already made himself comfortable.
Slavia. This is the
just chilling
biggest
out.
movement of Russian troops since the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Last night,
Bogey's over there at the
heard
window.
from a European diplomat who said, this is these are the final hours in which there will be peace in Europe for a very, very, very long time. There's a lot.
This is the final hours of peace in Europe for a very, very long time.
Ukraine, obviously a huge country.
Good Lord.
If Russia gets control of Ukraine, it changes the entire geostrategic balance of Europe. All of a sudden, Russian troops are going to be on the border of all these NATO allies, but countries that are very much aligned with the West. Already, we're seeing tens of thousands of people lining up to try to come across the Ukrainian border into Poland. There will be spillover. You cannot have an attack this large and not have spillover into the rest of Europe. The European diplomat I talked to says they're girding for the biggest humanitarian crisis since the Syrian refugees descended on Europe 7 years ago amid the civil war there. And
they've still got an ongoing refugee crisis
like this in our lifetimes.
Rhonda Colvin, let's talk a little bit about what we know about how Americans are interpreting all of this. We have been warned by President Biden that Americans could feel pain at the pump, Rhonda. We're seeing the Dow fall into correction. So what is the latest on American attitudes?
Yeah, and you're right to mention that's been sort of a centerpiece in a lot of his addresses over the last 7 days, that he is preparing Americans for a potential backlash or negative impact here on our soil. How will it affect us? He's talked about cyber attacks. He's talked about this affecting inflation, the rising cost of everything. So he has been pretty upfront with Americans, and that's likely why will be a part of what he is going to come out here soon and talk about. But I have been tracking this because it's
which has been pushed back. If you're joining us for the Biden speech, it looks like it's going to be happening in about an hour.
Weeks. Americans have a lot of questions, and there was a new poll that AP did yesterday, and it asked respondents.
So we're going to be sticking around. Washington Post has done a pretty good job thus far.
Further conflict.
I might go try to find the live shots from Kiev and Moscow. There are anti-war protests going on in Moscow.
That shows you the appetite. But when you look a little bit deeper into that and break that down by political parties, this is what I found interesting. 52% 40% of Democrats say that the U.S. should play a minor role, whereas 54% of Republicans.
This is the live shot from Moscow right now. With anti-war protesters. It was the live shot. Apparently it has gone black for the moment. That's what the scene looked like about 10 minutes ago in Moscow. That's what I'm talking about. Apparently they're very fond of fluorescent lights in Russia. I flipped to the shot of Kiev. And you know, it's a very tungsten color. It's an orangish color to the city. Everything's all white in Moscow. That was the live shot. It has gone black. This is Reuters we're looking at right now. I guess we'll come back to that here in a little bit.
Not have any nuclear weapons, so that did keep that region as well as the world safe. And he also pointed out that America also has to be on guard. Even if something's not happening on our soil, we have to be on guard because there are ramifications that could affect us all. So that's sort of the sell here that members of Congress have been telling constituents, and we're also seeing Biden do that as well.
And of course, Rhonda, we will see as things materialize on the ground and we see these pictures and images and reporting if that alters, of course, people's attitudes and reactions. To that point, let's see what has been happening in Ukraine following a night of explosions in Kharkiv. One family with a 5-month-old baby wondered what they should do next and where they could go to find safety. Our colleague, Washington Post journalist Whitney Leeming spoke.
So this is the shot. You can see they had it up in their top left-hand corner. This is the live view of Maidan Square in Kiev. Very peaceful at the moment. It's not like they're shelling the capital city or anything. Washington Post got some video of attacks apparently.
And I wrote messages to my friends in Odessa, Kiev, and Dnipro, and they also confirmed that they also heard this sound. So for me, it was no doubt anymore.
RB, you bring up a very good point that it's very possible that the situation is changing by the minute. They're revising Biden's speech.
At the way like the government handled this thing, because they kept telling us till yesterday that we should stay calm, that nothing.
What's up, Igloo?
And I knew it. I knew that something was going to happen. Nobody's prepared. Everybody's panicking. Everybody's running out. They could have prepared us better. So, like this thing happening now, like just makes.
And it is 8:40 p.m. in Moscow.
That was really, and also was probably prepared. And secondly, I'm upset that the government is saying nothing. Like they're just silent.
I have a ticket, and I'm supposed to fly.
Once again, we got about 50 minutes until Biden gives his speech.
Now I know that airport.
I believe they're shooting for 1:30 Eastern time.
I don't know what to do. For now, we will see.
I don't know even how to describe how we feel. We just like you can't just hope, you know. This, like you can't just hope that, you know, like for me, they're a priority. So I just hope that they can go out of here. You know, I'm a man. I can find a way. I can do something. I can hide. I can run. I can do anything. But with a baby, it's impossible.
I like this guy. I don't know why. He strikes me as a really nice guy. I'd like to sit down and have dinner with him.
Video recorded by our colleague Whitney Leeming, who is there in Ukraine, giving us a sense of what people there are wrestling with. James Homan, once again, we hear about this disconnect between civilians saying, I was hearing one message from my Ukrainian government. I was hearing another message perhaps on social media or generally, and now I'm coping with a very abrasive and frightening reality on the ground.
Yeah, Libby, and it's so good to see that reporting. Painful to watch because it's
Not that I know of, Igloo.
human consequence. We're talking about a
I don't know of any strikes outside of the
In a
supposed
civil
sovereign regions
This is a
that
bunch
were
of-
recognized by Russia.
well, there was obviously so much trauma.
The separatist
last
regions.
August. And one of the things that we are seeing, and we're hearing from the Pentagon and intelligence community, and anecdotally from reports on the ground, is continuing Russian cyber attacks.
What's up, Kayla?
Denial of service attacks.
Welcome.
That have shut down a lot of ATMs in the country, so people are lining.
I did see footage of like Russians
closed,
running for the ATM, saying that they weren't able to withdraw money.
Cyber attacking a lot of Ukrainian government websites where people might go for services.
I don't know how much that has to do with cyber attacks and how much has to do with the sanctions imposed earlier in the week.
Disinformation into what the Russians call the information space. You really conducting information warfare. And
We just saw a live shot of
what
Kiev,
we just saw in a much more precarious, much more scary.
and everything seemed peaceful.
We are seeing reports from the Ukrainian Interior Ministry that Ukrainian military aircraft have been shot down. We're seeing a lot of images of downed Ukrainian.
This is the view from the main square of Kiev.
Certainly, it's not safe right now to fly any kind of commercial aircraft in Ukraine. And in fact, there's a tragic history in recent years of the Russian-provided missiles being used by the separatists to shoot down a commercial airliner in eastern Ukraine. So it's incredibly scary, and it means that the only real way.
Well, we had a story of fucking Belarus causing a plane to land. What, this was about 6 months ago?
And a lot of
5 months
Ukrainians
ago?
do feel
They
so
had a
from
journalist
the
on the
perspective of
plane. They were
President
flying
Biden
over
and the
Belarus.
Ukrainian leadership.
And the president grounded the plane.
And angrily complaining that the U.S. government was saying that an invasion was looming. I
don't know what was up with the fluorescent. Like,
people fleeing the country, they didn't want to see
it's jarring
the
to
currency
me.
collapse or foreign investment dry up, and so they gave people false assurances that everything was going to be okay, and they continued to do that through recent days. And sadly, it's sort of what we saw in Afghanistan last summer too, where Ashraf Ghani, the Afghan president, kept
This
saying
is what
capital Kabul was fine,
Ukraine looks
and then
like.
all of a sudden he
Kiev.
fled, and everyone else was left holding the bag. And something similar.
Still dark on the live shot over in Moscow, but if we go back a little bit, you'll see what I'm talking about with the fucking fluorescent lights. Everything's so white in Russia.
Я на 2800 оставил, потому что здесь и зеленый свет.
Let's go back now to national reporter Hannah Jewell for an update on the president's expected remarks. Hannah.
Hi, Libby. So we are still waiting to hear from President Biden about what new
It's a live shot. The Washington Post has the live shot up as well.
The president has been on the phone today with members of the G7, with President Zelensky, with others, meeting with its national security team. And we're waiting now to hear from him about 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, about an hour later. We don't know the cause for that delay. But in the meantime, I have been actually messaging with a friend of mine who is Ukrainian. She's currently living in Germany, but her
So yeah, this is in the last few hours. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says Russian forces are trying to seize the Chernobyl power plant, which is the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. What are they actually going to fucking clean it up? Russian military forces entered the zone of the nuclear power plant, and fighting there has raised fears that it could trigger a large-scale environmental disaster, according to Ukrainian officials. Now, they just constructed a new sarcophagus that goes around the fucking plant. That's like it's supposed to last 100 years or something to that effect. They just put that in place. 2018, 2019. It hasn't been that long ago. So hopefully the Russians aren't shelling that shit. Kiev's forces are fighting off Russian troops for control of the Chernobyl plant, which spewed radioactive waste across Europe when one of its nuclear reactors exploded in April of 1986. I don't know what Russia would do with the plant. It's not operable. Like, it's not like they're going to seize the plant and start, bringing the fucking generators back online. That ain't happening. Wild!
All right, thank you so much, Hannah Jewell. And as Hannah said, we do expect to see President Biden speak at 1:30 Eastern Time coming up shortly. We will be with you throughout and during that speech, and then on the back end of it to provide some analysis here live from the.
Now, Zelensky is calling it a war with the whole of Europe, with them attacking Chernobyl.
Olivier, Hannah gave us some important history and context there. Concessions that Ukraine had made, and there is the question.
Garish design, is that what that's
called?
called?
The rest of the world hold its commitments to Ukraine, even though it's not a NATO nation. Talk to us about the relationship.
Obtrusively bright and showy.
Well, she was referring to the Bucharest Memorandum, which was ironically enough signed by Russia and the United States. The relationship with NATO is a really complicated one. Ukraine has been pushing for NATO membership for years and years, and they are technically on something called a membership action plan. So if they meet certain conditions, they would be considered.
Never gonna get it. Never gonna get it.
Except that now Vladimir.
Oh yeah, I broke out some in vogue on you.
Because it's unthinkable that Ukraine would be invited to join NATO with its borders in dispute and an occupying force there. And so if you've been listening to the President of the United States for the past weeks, and people on this live stream probably have been, you've heard one consistent refrain, which is that he is beefing up the American presence in NATO countries, but that he will not send American troops to fight Russia in Ukraine. And that's a very important distinction.
I want to bring Rhonda into the conversation, James, and then get back to you, Olivier. Rhonda, you were breaking down some of the latest poll numbers for us. I want you to share with us, Rhonda, what stood out the most to you, because Olivier wrote about this in his Daily 202 today. So what stands out the most to you in terms of how Americans are interpreting and digesting what the role of the United States should be?
Yeah, it's that first question to the people who were polled, and it's how big of a role do you think the United States should play in this? And it was only 20.
What do you guys think Russia is trying to provoke the United States to do?
Really, gives you some insight on how
are they goading us into?
Of course, that question was also broken
down. Getting caught up in another quagmire.
Following this closely, and those who are not following it as closely.
Are they thinking that the U.S. isn't going to do anything?
Media reports or understanding the history of Ukraine and Russia, they believe that the United States.
The Obama red line got crossed.
But it's really that quarter of Americans saying that they really
multiple times by Putin.
Tells you
the invasion of Crimea, the use of chemical weapons in Syria.
And the White House understand this. This may be another reason why he has given regular speeches on this in the last.
Which there's some dispute about.
Back in early January when he gave that.
Did the Assad forces use chemical weapons, or were they rebel groups possibly supplied by Russia using chemical weapons?
Call it imminent, but he has at least been consistent in the ways.
We're playing 4D chess over here.
I'm sure that's a part of the calculation with the White House in terms of how transparent.
But what does Russia want out of the U.S. in this whole situation? What are they trying to provoke us to do?
America's longest war in Afghanistan. Of course, Biden took a lot of criticism for how that was handled. So I'm sure.
I would assume you wouldn't want to station troops in Chernobyl because it's still radioactive. It is not occupied.
Americans say we should not have a major role. So that shows the White House has more.
What's the name of that little Priknik?
Americans that if we.
I'm probably saying it wrong. That city that is right there next to the Chernobyl plant is not occupied.
What kind of a lift the White House and President Biden have?
That area has been abandoned.
Coming off the heels of Afghanistan.
Right.
What was it? 86.
The poll we're talking about, Associated Press, and
1986
suggests that Biden has actually a fair amount of room to run here because, as she noted, the more people find out about what's going on in Ukraine, the more they are willing to embrace a larger U.S. role. One of the frustrations, and I'm sorry to do any media on media violence whatsoever, but one of the frustrations from that poll is that major role, minor role are not defined. And so it's hard to get.
That would be a problem with the poll.
interacts with.
Also, we looked at a poll not that long ago that showed like the less people knew about where Ukraine was located on a map. Pripyat.
Lay out the stakes.
Thank you,
Which
Tones.
he's done consistently since January 1st, but also talk to Americans about what they can expect to see. There's a not totally implausible situation in which the United States comes out the way the UK just did with sweeping sanctions that damage the Russian economy, and Vladimir Putin decides it's time to show off some of his cyber warfare capabilities. We already saw cyber attacks shut down an American pipeline last year. There could be other after effects.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson had just finished speaking about the time the stream came on.
Of the economics.
About 40 minutes ago.
I don't want to call it warfare. The economic conflict here, the sanctions. And he's
My apologies for missing out on Boris. He's always a hoot.
That stood out to me in that poll is it did not come through that a lot of Americans have been thinking about this as an immediate problem for them. And so I think the president has to talk a little bit about
I don't see how it's any kind of immediate problem for me.
As a consequence of what is now the largest military conflict in Europe since World War II.
Olivier, what are you watching in the coming hours? In addition to President Biden's words, what else is on your mind right now?
Also, how interesting is it that, like, Putin was doing all this provocation
British
leading up to 2016.
Go back through that, and
Trump wins.
Clues about what the United States will do based on what
Putin didn't pull any of this shit until we got Biden in office.
Has gone after two banks that primarily fund state projects.
Why?
Including military acquisition. But it has left.
I would think if you wanted to pull some fuckery in Ukraine, you would have done it under Trump and got far less pushback.
Ordinary Russians, so to speak, will also feel some of the pain. I'm watching that.
Yeah, I'll pause you there because we have some tape of the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking earlier today.
Oh, hey, ask and you shall receive. Here we go with old Boris.
Russia has unleashed war in our European continent. He's attacked a friendly country without any provocation and without any credible excuse. Today, in concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy. And to that end, we must also collectively cease.
So that means starving Russian people.
That for too long has given Putin his grip on Western politics.
Olivier Knox, how important is it that countries sort of work together in unity here in responding to Russia, not just European countries, not just the United States, but other countries as well?
Right. One of the terms you're going to hear in the coming weeks is backfill, and it refers to countries that don't agree to go along with sanctions proposed or enforced by the United States, and therefore their businesses.
Sorry, if you see me looking off, they're still doing work around my apartment.
What the role that America
there are people.
Play. I think it's very important. The united front that we're seeing here is very significant, especially since a number of the countries in Europe are heavily, and I mean heavily, dependent on Russian energy exports. So they stand to take a real hit. That's very important to watch.
Which is another reason why Russia wants to be in control of that region.
On the Russian side, Putin did that remarkable theatrical meeting with his national security council.
Very
they each come out
oil mineral heavy.
He then went to the Duma and demanded essentially a vote authorizing him to use the military outside of Russia's borders. Today, he held a similarly theatrical meeting with a number of oligarchs, one of whom very nervously asked him not to do any more damage to the Russian economy. And in the meantime, he has deployed a massive police presence to crack down on even the tiniest anti-war demonstrations in Russia.
Apparently, they took the Reuters camera offline.
About these
we had a live shot from the anti-war protests in Moscow. Oh, here we go. Oh no.
Else we're seeing, I wouldn't say that he has an ironclad hold on his power. As powerful as he is, he does.
They are still not live.
Something
happened.
In his support.
Let's bring James Homan into the conversation.
Yeah, you can see Russian police arresting people.
What countries are you watching in terms of the international response?
About 16 minutes ago on the live feed.
It is really striking. Even China, whose leader Xi Jinping met with Vladimir Putin during the Olympics. In many ways, they've been coming closer together after, obviously, a lot of tensions, a lot of mistrust still exists. China distancing itself from Russia going into Ukraine, saying they shouldn't do that. saying they were caught by surprise. So that is pretty striking, especially because if China moves on Taiwan, they're going to want Russian support. And obviously, I think China is watching.
Also, that situation is more complex.
What they could get away with vis-a-vis Taiwan and other countries in what they see as their sphere of influence. On the European continent,
I don't see them moving on Taiwan as much as I see them doing what they're doing to Hong Kong and installing
things on sanctions.
Pro-Communist Party
diamonds and
politicians rigging the elections.
Exempted, so does Italy.
And taking over the democratic institutions of Taiwan.
Large financial institutions like Germany that don't want to kick Russia out of the SWIFT financial system, which basically lets them be part of the network to make it easy to transfer money around. Just in the last few minutes, Adam Schiff, the Democratic chairman,
you can't see John Cena,
called for kicking Russia out of SWIFT, which would be
Am I the only one that wakes up every morning singing the "Do you really want to taste it" song, or is that everybody?
Places like London and Berlin with large banks are afraid to take that step, fearing that it could hurt their economy. So far, though, the Biden administration has done a pretty good job keeping everyone, at least publicly, in recent days, projecting a united front. The question then is, how far will
maybe we can get John Cena to learn some Russian and apologize to Putin. We can get this all resolved.
There have never been sanctions imposed personally on Vladimir Putin. After the Russians annexed Crimea, after they interfered in the 2016 election, there were a lot of sanctions on Russian oligarchs, members of Russian intelligence, but there have never been sanctions directly on Putin that really hit him personally in the pocketbook, and that might change. There's
as I understand it, he has money fucking everywhere.
Leaders, for understandable reasons, among other leaders. But this is one of the big open questions as we wait to hear from President Biden.
So can you really target
that President Biden was speaking
Putin with sanctions?
7 leaders and nations earlier today. Japan is...
That's what I wake up every morning with the fucking Peacemaker, the theme.
The role that Japan
what, the choir boys?
Responding. Our colleague Michelle Yeehee Lee has been reporting.
I'm doing the whole fucking song and dance in my head every fucking morning.
Significant. So we are watching the Japanese Prime Minister.
We should be watching Japan. We should also be watching Singapore and Taiwan. These are all exporters of tech to Russia, and they could all be corralled by the White House.
Yeah, Putin.
To cease those exports, and that would hamper Russian industry, would hamper Russian military and the like. So it is actually really important to watch. If I could just deviate a tiny bit, one of the countries that's interesting to watch is Saudi Arabia, which has categorically rejected Biden's appeals to boost oil production, sort of as a counter to the disruptions that we're going to see because of this conflict. The UAE has also not been especially supportive of the American line, but the Asian component to this, we need to...
It was infectious, so it gets stuck in your head.
Surreal now how closely that has hewed to reality. I mean, exactly.
We're about 30 minutes away from President Joe Biden speaking.
Statements from pro-Russian separatists calling for the Russians to help them. And
oh no, Tones! It's amazing. It's amazing.
Ukrainians triggering some military action that allegedly had begun this whole event. We hadn't seen any evidence of that.
I really enjoyed the new Suicide Squad though.
Buzz by Ukrainian cities and explosions.
And that's what it's a spin-off from the events of the new Suicide Squad.
In terms of the precision with which this was forecast by U.S. officials.
So, John, how much...
And I don't watch the superhero comic book movies very much, so...
Between what's happening at the State Department and what's happening in other countries in Europe. We were talking about Asia just a few minutes ago, some of the Asian leaders. There seems like there's just like so much conversation happening right now. On
I highly enjoyed Peacemaker. I recommend it.
A ton of diplomatic discussions going on right now.
I highly recommend it.
You had been getting into this discussion.
Very much enjoyed.
Interviewees about the sanctions game. That's huge. How is the Western coordinated response going to be? How hard is it going to hit the Russians? Then the other level is the political.
Apparently, Russians already are having a hard time taking out money from ATMs as of today.
Diplomats in the who represent the United States working in New York at the United Nations.
It would have been nice if we still had a live shot of Moscow.
On how the next steps are going to play out in the United States. And the way that they're going to move this forward is
Moscow put an end to that shit.
Resolution condemning Russian action at the United Nations that's going to be held up for a vote tomorrow. Now, we have already heard a lot, and I think even casual readers will recall headlines in recent hours about the United States criticizing Russia at the United Nations. What's different about this is that they are going to put forward a resolution. It's not, but previously these were just remarks, and now this is a resolution. So this is a real scramble to see what like-minded nations come behind this resolution that will condemn the Russian military action.
What a novel idea, Tones.
The familiar allies.
Warlord did tell me. I've been skeptical of all this. I've thought it was all just fucking bluster from both sides.
The big question mark is, what a country.
I don't, and I still don't know that it's not bluster from both sides. That Putin and Biden aren't on phone calls together, like, this is good for Raytheon. This is good for Boeing.
Vetoed by the Russians.
Good for Lockheed Martin.
Is to isolate Russia on the international stage.
Let's just keep playing it up.
For its actions, and that
Russia wants to look like a big baddie on the world stage.
In brokering deals,
the U.S. wants to spend money on defense contractors. It's a win-win for everybody.
It's true that Russians' actions themselves are maybe their most the greatest liability that they have. And
apparently, even Ukraine has been playing this up because they wanted some of that sweet fucking U.S. money and some of those sweet U.S. arms
at the United Nations.
And that they've been playing up the threat in order to get the U.S. to pay more attention to them.
An emergency meeting held at the request of Ukraine. Simultaneously, we were hearing Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, make this very newsy but also very frightening speech, and the attack on Ukraine was launched. So what is the role right now of the UN in terms of actually having heft and muscle? You talked about isolating Russia. Are there other vehicles that are seen as ways to do that?
I mean, at this point, I think you're right. That split screen was incredible, and I think it also laid bare the limits of the world body that is the United Nations Security Council in brokering and coercing in any sort of way. The reality is, when you have a UN Security Council member, a permanent seat,
a veto power.
And so really the only thing that you're going for is naming and shaming. Other than that, it is pretty much just a gab fest. And that's why there was so much frustration as you saw basically, explosions ripping across Ukrainian cities last night. It also came as nations representatives in New York were saying, let's call for de-escalation. Let's stop, war from happening. In fact, military.
RB, my tummy is growling already.
And
hopefully Biden doesn't talk for too long.
And updating their remarks from saying, let's, not go across the Rubicon, and then saying, actually, it has been crossed, and going from warning and pleas for peace to now basically pleas for ceasefire to stop the violence. And that will probably be the next phase as well. Can the Russians be convinced to slow and stop their assault? I think officials here at the State Department and elsewhere have their doubts that Russia is going to stop until they complete what they view as their mission.
John, as...
What is their mission? I'm still confused as to what anybody wants out of this situation.
Other American leaders have said, here's what we expect Vladimir Putin to do, here's what could come next, and those things have happened. There's obviously been a lot of work put into planning and trying to make...
To the best of my knowledge, it seems that the U.S.'s position is just Putin go home.
What are the calculations?
Putin, you're drunk. Go home.
Now into sanctions in terms of feared retribution by Russia. That, you know, we heard this sort of threat by Vladimir Putin yesterday to the world in reacting, warning the world about how they would react to what Russia was doing in Ukraine. So how much are leaders having to think 5 steps ahead to what Russia would do as a countermeasure?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Russia is such a major player when it comes to the military. And there are a lot of questions about what needs to be considered in terms of things they can do that we might not even be anticipating as a result from this. If all of this just stays in Ukraine, then it stays in Ukraine. But remember, Russia has a long, arm. It also has mercenary organizations like
reinforce the Russian sphere of influence.
Venezuela. It's also involved in the Sahel and Africa. Are the ripple effects going?
Are you saying Putin is on a mission to make Russia great again?
Such a stiff warning when he began this military intervention, saying, if you get in our way, you are going to be hit harder than you've ever been hit before. And I think that was a signal that he is going to conduct.
He's been laying here the whole time.
Ukraine, and will lash out ferociously.
He really wanted some attention
his way. Obviously, the sanctions are coming. He anticipated that. He would have had to. There was so much warning.
Ow, buddy! Ow!
About that. But the difficult aspect about
he fucking bit me.
Confrontation is there are so many moments.
The other two were over at the window, like, what? What happened?
Mistakes, accidents, and for violence to spike out of control. And I think that is what is on a lot of leaders' minds in the United States right now on trying to limit the damage that can come out of this.
Thank you so much. John Hudson joining us live from the State Department. Really appreciate it, John. And to that end, here's some of the latest.
We're about 20 minutes away from President Joe Biden giving us whatever speech he's going to give.
Russian invasion forces have taken over the Chernobyl.
You got tired of my shit.
Power plant, that abandoned plant, of course, that was the scene of the 1986 disaster. Our colleagues are reporting that in the Washington Post. To John's point about ramifications.
I highly recommend the Chernobyl miniseries that was on HBO.
Pager, who's joining us from the White House.
I enjoyed it very much. To me, I laugh at horror movies. But like Chernobyl, like it's something that was real and
meetings he's been having
actually happened.
He's had conversations with the G7.
The way it was depicted, that was true horror to me.
Yeah, so he met this morning with his G7 counterparts where they talked about the latest in Russia and Ukraine, and they've agreed to move forward on what he is calling a, quote, devastating package of sanctions and other economic measures.
I'll show you a devastating package.
That's a tweet that he sent out about a half an hour ago, and right now, from my understanding at sources at the White House, is he's in the Oval Office reviewing his speech.
I pull my pants down and women laugh at me, and then I'm devastated.
In the speech, which he'll give shortly, he is expected to lay out some of these sanctions that the G7, the U.S. and its Western allies are going to put on Russia, and we're expecting
watching the old PSAs of the whole the duck under your desk and shit, because that was my mom's generation, right? Had to do the nuclear war drills and shit.
Harsher penalties, economic measures to really try to choke off the Russian economy from the rest of the world. And also, I think we're going to hear the president talk about
only drills I remember when I was a kid. Because like I was born between the nuclear war drills and the school shooting drills. What we had was like tornado drills when I was in school.
The role of the United States compared to other countries and other allies who were all
go into the hallway and put your head between your legs, pretty much.
Just how forceful to be against Vladimir Putin and Russia.
Yeah, look, I think the United States feels, and President Biden feels that the U.S. has to play a big role in working with other Western allies, the other G7 countries, to coordinate and collaborate on sanctions, obviously.
Boomers!
The connected nature of the global economy.
RB, I don't know if you've ever been in Twitch when I've dumped you over at Echoplex.
As it could with its partners. I think
they've got a song they play called Boomers. Is really good. I can't remember the name of the band off the top of my head.
That is why we haven't heard from the
Ruffies, maybe.
they had this meeting to kind of find an agreement on which
Highly recommend checking it out.
to put on Russia, and then we'll hear some more details about those shortly. But I think this is something the president has talked about throughout his time in office, even as a candidate, that he strongly believes in alliances and ran.
Periscope isn't a thing anymore.
That he said were.
I used to have somebody that watched me every night on Periscope.
A time where he is showing that he's working with allies to.
Oh, you had school shooting drills, Aaron? Oh, that's the band name is Periscope. Oh, okay. Thank you, Tones.
We're hearing from Tyler Pager, who is live at the White House.
Oh, shit.
Get an image on your screen, a live shot from the White House, also a live shot from Kyiv, where it is after 8 o'clock at night. Tyler, there's so much else on the
Columbine happened my 8th grade year.
Speech next Tuesday night, and we were
there were minor changes throughout my high school career. They would lock all the doors.
What do we know about the rest
except for one
right now?
Yeah, look, there's obviously.
But we didn't have active shooter drills yet.
Just listed off two of the biggest things on his plate right now.
I think that's a.
At least for the Supreme Court, I think.
I think that's also a post 9 because 9/11 happened my senior year.
To nominate the replacement for Stephen Breyer, but.
I think post 9/11, things really started to change inside schools.
Situation in Russia and Ukraine, and that is occupying the most.
My entire high school career took place between Columbine and 9/11. Two very, earth-shattering events in American history,
I think
especially for a school-age child.
For the Supreme Court and the State of the Union, which will deliver on Tuesday. But I think, again, it's all
Now the kids are getting World War III. Yay!
Reporting live from the White House. Really appreciate it. Let's go back to James Hohmann. James, we were talking a few moments ago about this story.
Yeah, it's really post 9/11 that the country got into the security theater. It became a moneymaker as well. Post 9/11, everybody was scared. There were all kinds of companies popping up, probably going to teach you how to do active shooter drills and shit.
On the path to Kyiv, the Chernobyl region's up here. This is Russia. This is Belarus. It's part of what appears to be a Russian effort to take the capital, to topple the government. We know Volodymyr Zelensky, or the Ukrainian government says Volodymyr Zelensky is still in Ukraine. They suggested he's not in Kyiv, but they've declined to say where he is, trying to protect.
Wow, they're really talking like Russia's going to topple the government.
The history, but it's part of
in just a matter of time that is going to happen within the next few days. Zelensky may flee the fucking country. No fucking way.
Chernobyl is obviously abandoned.
Maybe I've been too cynical about this, and
when there was the fallout. Clouds of
I've downplayed it a lot, fucking the U.S. is just blowing smoke.
In Europe about potential explosions here. What I've heard from U.S. defense officials is that the Russian regular forces, they have conscription, they've been called up, but they actually train quite a lot on how to work.
But just 2 fucking weeks ago, it didn't seem like Russia was
more
on the verge of invading.
Troops do. And so
now if the fucking whole country of Ukraine falls within the next week or two, boy, am I gonna look stupid.
National Guardsmen, so not Ukrainian regular army, but the National Guard is clashing.
But I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong.
They fight for control over Chernobyl and make their way toward Kyiv. And again, this is the Dnieper River.
If the country falls, I don't know that I would change my stance on anything.
Russia appears to be attacking so that they can really surround the city, and if necessary, if the city doesn't capitulate.
What do you mean? What were we watching?
Sack Kyiv, the capital.
We're on the Washington Post right now. They've actually done a really good job of explaining things.
Rhonda Colvin, let's go to you for more on congressional leaders' reaction. A lot of Republicans were taking a very hawkish approach and asking for steep.
We're probably about
not all Republicans,
10 minutes and some change away from
Donald Trump, the former president, really
Biden speaking to us.
And almost citing, frankly,
I'm going to doubt he's going to take questions.
The last couple of days. But let's talk about leadership in Congress and how they're reacting.
But he may. He's Joe Biden. That's the part of his appeal is that he's going to stand around and talk to people afterwards.
Are on a week-long break, so they're mostly all in their districts right now. And from our reporting, we're hearing that Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader in the Senate, was asked by reporters at an event not long ago in Louisville, Kentucky, about his thoughts on where Biden is going with this right now. He said the current sanctions are tepid, in the tepid category. That's a quote from him. But he did say we are all together at this point. So he's been pretty consistent as the Republican leader in the Senate, saying that they do want to take up.
No, it's not Grim Reaper. This is Red Dragon.
Sanctions. He did say today that he believes that they should be increased and not in this tepid category. He was asked about those comments that the former president Donald Trump made this week, calling Putin a genius or making a genius move in terms of taking some of these territories. And Mitch McConnell said Putin is a bad guy. We need to stop him. So he is not agreeing with the former president on this. And this.
See, once again, the timing of it is weird because I don't like. Clearly, he wouldn't have faced any pushback
allies and
had he done it when Trump was in office.
Already we've seen.
So why do it now?
Stand with the Democrats and saying the same things, that the U.S. needs to support Ukraine.
Did Putin not want to put Trump in a position of looking weak? Specifically.
For the last several years. Let's think back to the special counsel's report, the Robert Mueller report, looking into the interference in the 2016 election. You had a lot of Republicans on the Hill standing by President Trump saying that this was a witch hunt, that Russia didn't do this. Now they're kind of put in a place where they're going to have to either side with Democrats and Biden and show support for the White House on any moves against Russia.
Oh, no. They're totally going to suck Putin cock.
Indication that they are going back to those types of statements, but this is putting them in a very interesting place right now, especially as we are heading into primary season, midterm election season, where before.
I mean, Tucker Carlson is on Fox defending Putin.
The House and the Senate had their plans.
Talking about how, like, oh, they want you to think Putin's a bad guy. Ha ha.
Over the House and Senate again. But right now they're in a position where they're going to perhaps have to agree on some things when they get back in town. And
if Tucker's saying it on Fox News, then that's the base of the party. That's their position.
Republicans are fitting into this conversation. You know, some are criticizing President Biden and saying he's not being strong enough, not being firm enough. And then we have others, Donald Trump, most namely, that are seeming to be quite pro-Putin, which is pretty shocking when you have to have Mitch McConnell saying that Putin
is a
bad guy as a response.
Yeah, Libby, we've noticed some.
Is it shocking?
Messaging. Someone like Josh Hawley, the Republican senator from Missouri, was taking the Tucker Carlson line, has been on Tucker Carlson's show saying this isn't our fight, why should we care? Today, putting out a statement saying Biden's not being tough enough, we need to supply the Ukrainians, we need to show backbone and resolve. That's an indication, I think, of where the majority of not just Republican elites, but Republican rank and file voters are. Something I've been watching really closely is the Ohio.
Being a right winger is so easy. You can just say fucking something completely different from what you said the day before, and nobody's gonna fucking care.
For writing the book, The Hillbilly Elegy, widely quoted, a lot of commentary in 2017. He said on Steve Bannon's podcast last week that he didn't care what happened to Ukraine one way or another. It didn't matter to him. Now the other four.
It's kind of weird that he brings up J.D. Vance, because I was kind of thinking he looked a little bit like J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance. They've all said that the U.S. should support Ukraine, that it does matter. And one of the reasons they're saying that is because the largest concentration.
But also, like, I got face blindness or some shit. I can't tell people apart.
His hometown is Cleveland. There's a suburb of Cleveland.
All fucking white men look alike to me.
Yesterday on the phone with Ukrainian Americans in Parma who were all outraged about what J.D. Vance said. Were all determined to do anything they could to support the other Republicans. Traditionally, ever since FDR and Stalin agreed at Yalta to give Ukraine to the Soviets, the Ukrainian American population has tended to vote Republican, but support for Ukraine actually has been, since World War II, very bipartisan. Last night, just by happenstance, I had an interview scheduled during the 9 o'clock hour, the hour that Putin gave his speech declaring war, with Marcy Kaptur. She's a Democratic congresswoman in Ohio, the longest serving woman in Congress ever, and she represents Parma. And I talked to Marcy Kaptur for almost an hour about.
Yeah, I dropped the ball. I should have carried the Putin speech last night. I didn't know what was going on.
To go to Ukraine, where she has relatives.
Got the fuck off here. I made a barbecue chicken pizza.
Got involved in
I played video games.
And she really emphasized just how bipartisan this has become as an issue, and that she really hopes Republicans like Mitch McConnell and others really do forcefully break with Trump, because what Trump is saying is so at odds with what has been the conservative position really since Dwight Eisenhower won the Republican nomination at the 1952 convention over an isolationist candidate who happened to be a senator from Ohio, Bob Taft.
I don't know what the fuck it military operation, declaring war, whatever the fuck.
Thank you.
I don't know. I don't.
Let's talk more.
We're still in the foreplay mode as far as I'm concerned right now.
In Ukraine.
This doesn't seem like a full-on war, but then again, they're fucking they're trying to take over Chernobyl or some shit.
Ukrainians in Kyiv, for example, were desperate to leave today by any means possible after the attack commenced this morning. People were flooding the train station, leading to chaos, and our colleague Whitney Shefty was there to give us a glimpse of the scene. Let's watch.
Я сама украинка, прилетела с Германии сегодня ночью, но случилась беда. Где-то в 6 утра с аэропорта нас эвакуировали вместе с дочкой.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jenkins. I wasn't paying attention. I'm somewhere else.
Потому что было какое-то нападение со скоростью...
Dude from the Washington Post was tripping me out with how much he looked like J.D. Vance, and he brought up J.D. Vance, and then I was stuck there.
Не знали, куда идти. Автобусы не ходят, машины мало пробегают рядом, и... Потом мы услышали взрывы какие-то, какую-то стрельбу. Как можно дальше мы бежали от этого аэропорта.
I'm skeptical of U.S. propaganda. I'm skeptical of Russian propaganda.
Ми працюємо.
Time for more weed, he says.
З дому подзвонили, що на Краснопольській границі стріляють. І ми зібралися, почали збиратися їхати додому. Ну так, як виїхати ми не можемо, ми стоїмо і не знаємо, що нам робити. Дома маленькі діти.
Ну, ми прокинулись від вибухів, було чутно. Спершу десь 5 вибухів, потім ще.
My apologies if anyone's listening to this on the podcast. They're like, what the fuck are those people saying? They're angry, but they want peace. That's what they're saying. Scared and I'm anxious.
Тому що у нас границя дуже близько дома. І потім, когда узнали, что поезда отменяются, много людей выходило отсюда и плакало просто. Потому что все движение...
I mean, it's not a good sign if the people are actually fleeing the country.
Было закрыто.
Ну, сегодня...
The more well-off people
понимаете, как...
are fleeing the country.
Но все равно, как бы, страшно. У меня вот сейчас муж на 16-м этаже в Броварах, в квартире.
That's why I get asked a lot of times, like, you know, am I going to leave the U.S.? It's like things look dire here, but like it is a position of privilege on me that I would be able to leave. I don't even know if I could. If I would have to scrape together all the resources I had in order to be able to hightail it out of here.
Еду в Кировоград, но на Кировоград вообще нету никаких.
But it is a possibility I could consider. But that's just a place of privilege for me that I am able to leave. I don't think it would be right of me to leave.
Окраїн міста, звідти спробуємо на автівки на маршрутному.
Hello, Ginger.
Варіантів в нас небагато, і кішки зроблені.
Sorry to have you join us under such circumstances. As apparently we're seeing the opening salvos of World War III.
У нас в Броварах уже квартира. Мы как бы выбрали Порошенко. У нас был прекрасный президент, которого мы...
I sound like me, right? I was listening to one of my clips yesterday, and I thought I sounded impaired. But no. I sound like me, right? I sound like that sweet radio voice is coming through.
И я как бы была военнообязанная. То есть я могу помочь нашим ребятам, ВСУшникам.
Did you see me walk up to like a
То есть я к этому готова. У нас под...
like a cashier at a gas station or something, and they'll be like, "Hello," and I'm like, "Good afternoon." It really fucking freaks them out.
Как бы у меня нет с собой оружия. Я еще не прикупила.
We're just mere minutes away from President Biden speaking. Now, they've pushed this back on us multiple times. He was originally going to speak at noon Eastern time. It was about an hour and a half ago.
By Whitney Shefty in Ukraine, just incredible.
They've pushed it back a couple different times. Now we are looking at 1:30 Eastern time.
Offering,
awaiting President Biden's speech.
Threatening that she will kill people, strangle people with her bare hands if it comes to that, giving us a sense of the heightened emotions. And
that woman is awesome. She will strangle people with her bare hands if it comes to it.
Let's go to Karin Demerjen, who covers national security for the Post.
That is a woman that Sparkles would admire.
The world powers, but then when you see our colleagues reporting from on the ground, talking to citizens who are confused and angry and scared, it really does.
And apparently, I thought I was like brightening up her day by sending her memes throughout the day. No. Apparently she's like, this motherfucker's looking at memes. I've got to work during the day. Fuck him.
And this conflict happen in Europe.
I mean, a large part
of what you missed if you missed the Freak Show this past Friday.
Making the American people kind of connect to this in both ways of, being prepared for what the domestic fallout is going to be.
Warlord.
Of why we should care. Last night there was speeches by the Ukrainian president, by the Russian president too, obviously.
Shaking your head at me.
Invasion. But the Ukrainian president really, he spoke to the Russian people and he spoke to the Ukrainian people in a very firm, very heartfelt sort of fashion. And that sort of...
the female mind and Sparkle's mind are two different things. Like, you can't just categorize her as like a normal female.
And we're all people and we're supposed to care about...
She is very different than anyone you've ever met.
So...
Come on, you've interacted with her enough to know.
He's going to have to both make the American people feel that in a way that, takes a population that is a population that is kind of tired of war and a little bit tired of geopolitics and makes them understand why this is such a big deal and something that they have to get behind. And also,
is this good walking content?
What Putin has done here. I mean, look, we have been here.
Also, don't pause your walk to answer that question. Just answer it to your convenience later.
It's going to get worse. This is the time when everybody's looking.
Sparkles is adorable, but she will also throat punch you. She will pull a gun on you.
What is going to happen for helping Ukraine?
But overall, she is adorable.
Pouring into Europe, you saw all those people at the train stations trying desperately to get out. Everybody is trying to outrun guns.
At least you're up and moving. That could help once Biden gets on here. Washington Post has actually done a really good job. I will give their correspondents and their reporters mad props. They've done a really good job of explaining all this.
We're trying to get as
much. I think this is possibly the best coverage I could have picked to pull up.
Narrators. What do we know?
I think I would have been far more let down with NBC or ABC News.
Centers in airports, striking military targets.
I would have liked to have been able to show you guys the live scene from Moscow, but apparently Putin shut that down.
That are homing in on.
We were watching a live feed from Reuters.
There's clearly a whole bunch of fighting in Kharkiv.
Where there were
from the
mass protests against war from the Russian people.
The footprint be expanded from them. I think that the Russians have made very clear that they are trying to.
Old man Biden should be out any moment now.
The Americans have been very clear that they think that the Russians are.
If they do not push it back again,
decapitate Ukraine's government. That suggests that any sort of military or government target.
See, this is the first time we're hearing about cutting off the head, decapitating the Ukrainian government. At least it's the first time I've heard about it. I have been checked out the last couple of days.
Missiles going into Ukraine. Again, this is as of a few hours ago. So all of the
I didn't realize. Like, I thought it was going to be another Putin power play.
Coming in again, moving.
Where he's going to take over another couple of regions that were sympathetic to Russia. I didn't think it was going to be a full scale takeover of the whole goddamn country.
You go towards.
Apparently, Zelensky's whole presidency is at risk at the moment.
The airports are not an option. You risk going downtown to train depots and things like that, or do you just try to go to the country into hinterlands where it may be safer because maybe there's no obvious targets there? These are the questions that are, confronting every Ukrainian right now who lives in these areas in the middle and in the eastern part of the country. And, people in the United States government have said that thus far, there's no real surprises in what we've seen. This was the worst of what they were warning that Putin might be capable of and going for.
I wonder why Germany and Italy might have
there's
an interest on making sure that Russia is still able to process payments.
But also concerned with the NATO neighbors to the east. We are repositioning F-35s in a few countries strategically on the NATO border. And clearly people are watching this moment by moment to make sure that those countries are ready to both accept the Ukrainians who are running out to the west, but also bolster their defenses, depending on how close Russia comes to that line. But right now, that does seem to be the missile action, the ground movement from the north, from the Belarusian front is what they are tracking. No amphibious assaults yet, but remember, Ukraine is surrounded by Russia to the east and sort of north, Belarus, which is kind of a vassal Russian state right now to the north, and the Black Sea coastline, which Russia has more control over.
Pretty much controls.
And have put many, many ships in that region as well.
All right, let's go to James Homan. Karin, if you can stay with us for a moment, and he can illustrate some of what you were just talking about. Karin cut out a little bit there, James. Which
it is an incredibly overcast day here.
Belarus, the water.
I know on my camera shot it looks like it's very bright, but it's.
Are you most watching here?
It is a dreary kind of day here. It was supposed to be like 70 and sunny, but it is not sunny, and they're not predicting it to get 70 anymore.
Away from the eastern part of the country.
Yeah, absolutely, Libby, and indeed. The entire western part of Ukraine.
I would prefer to have 70-degree weather right now,
which aren't enough to stop the overwhelming force of the Russian military, but they do provide some insulation, and they were significant in past European wars, including World War II. And what Karun is saying is absolutely right.
It's apparently 53 here right now, which is not nice at all.
Over here is where a lot of people are fleeing. There's long lines. People are abandoning their cars and going.
I hate Alabama weather.
Many border crossings, over that you can really take.
You get into August, September, and the air is like soup.
The U.S.
You're breathing in soup.
From Kyiv. The U.S. has a pretty large.
I hate it.
Diplomatic presence in Kyiv, and they've gone to Lviv, which is here in the western part of the country.
Had a weatherman describe it as oppressive air. That's exactly what it is. It becomes oppressive.
In Poland.
So you get into your goddamn car.
Conceivable that you would have,
and it is like you can't breathe because the temperature will be like 110.
Part of the country,
and just the air is just
there was
thick.
A scenario that had been discussed where maybe Putin only tried to take up to the Dnieper River, which is really the dividing line between.
So I was already considering moving, right? Like when the pandemic hit, and I was like, well, I'll sign my lease for another year, and then we get to the next year, and I'm like, oh, I'll sign my lease for another year. It doesn't look like this pandemic's going to end. I'm month to month right now, and I have been putting applications in, resumes. I'm very picky about a job at this moment. I like what I do for myself, but also I could probably I could use getting out of the house and interacting with people again. Once again, we are awaiting President Joe Biden speaking on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is apparently going full out, balls to the walls. They're coming from the east. They're coming from the north. We're speculating that they might be coming from the south.
Which used to be a pretty independent country until the last year or two really did a pretty good job of playing the west and east off.
I moved here during an incredible drought. It was like the worst drought this area had seen.
From Russia, the leader there.
And then since then, it has just been the weirdest fucking weather.
Lost a free and fair election, or illegitimately kind of held power, wouldn't give up power. That really alienated him with the West. And so now that has allowed Russian forces to move deeper into Belarus. And so you can see, as Karim was talking about.
So we talking about Lukashenko?
Had control of Crimea since 2014. They control the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait, which is really significant. And so there,
1 year was pleasant. There wasn't it wasn't as bad as it has been. But it's only been one fucking year. And I want to say it was 2020. It was the pandemic
all
year.
the refugees who want to get out of Ukraine.
But there was more pleasant weather than there usually is. We're in a La Nina right now.
We have about 3,500 U.S. troops. There's a story in our...
It should be more pleasant weather.
Right across the border in Poland, where a lot of famous musicians have performed. Right now it's full of cots for U.S. troops who are preparing for any potential spillover. That is where you get into the risk of potential escalation, and Putin is being obviously crazy, but he is rational, and a lot of Western officials expect
he's being crazy, but he's rational.
Potential blowups that would pull the United States into war, because if that happens, then
he's the rational Russian that's also acting crazy.
And to that end, Karin Demerjen, President Biden, as well as other American leadership, has been very careful as they've talked about where American troops would be, how close to Ukraine or far away from Ukraine they would be. There seems to be a lot of very direct signaling, very overt signaling to make it clear that they are not engaging in a boots.
You came here the year after the tornadoes, then.
I mean, right. I mean, that's been very concerted, and that's because NATO...
It's still wild that I can walk up here on the trails near my apartment. I can see where a tornado went up the mountain because the trees aren't there. It's fucking wild.
Ukraine, and frankly, that would probably end up being an escalation. Sad as that is what Putin's banking on, and it's a fairly smart calculation on his part, because he knows that the NATO countries are very reticent to go beyond their borders. And that has been, frankly, why Ukraine has probably not advanced any further in its NATO aspirations than it did all this time. If you have 20% of your country being occupied by a foreign and adversary power, that makes it very difficult to join a defense alliance. It fundamentally boils down to that Article 5 of an attack on one is an attack on all. I would just add, going back to what James was talking about with the map.
Yeah, I was at a TV station for the 5-year anniversary. They made a real big deal about it.
In all of this,
I mean, it was a big deal. It's wild. It's
Mariupol,
to see the tornado pass and everything.
Of Crimea on that Sea of Azov area that he circled.
It was something like fucking 25 E4s or some
7-8
shit.
years ago, the last time I was in the region, that could be a very strategic way of choking off
Ukraine. 2 E5s.
West of that, nearer to Moldova, is Odessa, which is a very famous, storied city in Ukraine. But also Odessa has always had a fairly sympathetic to Russia population. Not entirely, but there are potential people there who would not...
There are pockets all over Ukraine, predominantly in the east.
Kiev, et cetera, would be. Now, we've seen that the main first assault has been on those larger first...
That's why it's a more complicated issue than Western media makes it out to be.
2 places to the south also, that could indicate how far Putin intends to go with this.
But nothing changes my position that the U.S. shouldn't be involved in this shit. NATO shouldn't be a fucking thing.
Of where this ends up going and how far it goes, and what the Ukrainians do in response. Because again, Russia's got a lot of firepower and a lot of boots and a lot of sailors ready to go at this, but holding a country like the size of Ukraine with a population...
We're still waiting on President Joe Biden to give his remarks. He's about 10 minutes late for this latest time that we've been given. They keep pushing it back.
So this is a whole bunch of unknowns here about how that is going to go forward.
Rhonda Colvin, we're expecting President Biden to speak shortly. Set us up for what we should be listening for.
Well, I think right now from what we're hearing is that he is prepared to talk about more specific and stronger sanctions. That looks like the direction that this is headed in. And of course, I think it's also going to follow the framework.
And I'm amazed at the quality of the Washington Post reporting while being owned by Jeff Bezos, as I broadcast on Twitch, which is owned by Jeff Bezos.
Serious this has become.
I reiterate my feelings of fuck Jeff Bezos.
I think he really is going to make sure that point hits home. And I think from what I am seeing from members of Congress who have been coming out with their own bold statements on what should be done next, I think they'll also be listening to this as well and preparing what to do next week when they return. But I think right now he has the responsibility opportunity as president to tell everyone where America stands right now, what are these new developments, and how America is going to respond next. So we know earlier this week he said that
It's almost 9 o'clock in Moscow, if that makes a difference.
Over the coming days, and I think right now, because of what happened last night,
I would think if things are calming down, or maybe...
So I think these
maybe they are conducting their operations overnight and things are actually getting ready to escalate.
Sure American people know what's going on.
What do I know? I'm an idiot American.
Specific steps the United
sitting
States
in his living room.
And it's always, I always say this, even on the Hill when we're waiting on long breaks.
I don't know shit about shit.
Always be mindful of when we see these long delays.
Mainly play with my dick and my video games.
Anything crazy is happening behind the scenes, but it does mean that this is being taken care,
just saying.
Considered the words, his posture as he comes out. I believe Tyler.
She seems to know what she's talking about, though.
A few days ago.
What's up, Alice?
That Biden was in the Oval Office making sure that he had his messaging correct.
We are awaiting Joe Biden to tell us what's going on with...
No, exactly. But anytime you see these long delays, it also points to...
RB could be delayed. Fucking YouTube is always delayed, so RB could be laughing at something I said 2 or 3 minutes ago.
How far sanctions can go. And we've heard a message from President Biden up till now of keeping a door open for diplomacy. But James... is that door? President Biden's coming out.
We're waiting for Biden. Here he comes.
President of the United States speak. This is live coverage.
Hour and 45 minutes later than what he was supposed to be.
Good afternoon. The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity. This is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along. He moved more than 100.
I mean, I fucking doubted you, but
equipment in positions along the Ukrainian border. He moved blood supplies into position and built a field hospital, which tells you all you need to know about his intentions all along. He rejected every good faith effort the United States and our allies and partners made to address our mutual security concerns through dialogue to avoid needless conflict and avert human suffering. For weeks, we have been warning that this would happen. And now it's unfolding largely as we predicted. In the past week, we've seen shelling increase in the Donbass, a region in eastern Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists. The Russian government has perpetrated cyber attacks against Ukraine. We saw a staged political theater in Moscow, outlandish and baseless.
Bidenism Zelensky.
Ukraine was about to invade and launch a war against Russia. That Ukraine was prepared to use chemical weapons. The Ukraine committed a genocide. Without any evidence, we saw a flagrant violation of international law and attempting to unilaterally...
I mean, the fucking U.S. does that shit all the time.
...sovereign Ukrainian territory. And at the very moment that...
Russia may have done it.
Stand up for you.
I don't feel like we have a platform to be able to wag our fingers about it.
Within moments, missile strikes began to fall on historic cities across Ukraine. Then came the air raids, followed by tanks and troops rolling in. We've been transparent with the world. We've shared declassified evidence about Russia's plans and cyber attacks and false pretexts so that there could be no confusion or cover-up about what Putin was doing. Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose...
Anarcho-Bidenist!
Now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact.
I fucking love my chat. You guys are hilarious.
I want to be clear. The United States is not doing this alone. For months, we've been building a coalition of partners representing well more than half the global economy. 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and many others to amplify the joint impact of our response.
The hell of a roster you got
I just
there.
spoke with the G7 leaders this morning, and we're in full and total agreement.
The coalition of the willing.
To do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen to be part of the global economy. We'll limit their ability to do that. We're going to stunt the ability to finance and grow the Russian military. We're going to impose major, and we're going to impair their ability to compete in high-tech 21st century economy. We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history. The Russia stock market plunged today. The Russian government borrowing rate spiked by over 15%. In today's actions, we've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets
Italy.
by itself.
I didn't even notice him saying Italy.
Financial system. And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen. This includes VTB, the second largest bank in Russia, which has $250 billion in assets. As promised, we're also adding the names to the list of Russian elites and their family members that we're sanctioning as well.
You just made the list.
These are people who personally gain from the Kremlin's policies, and they should share in the pain. We will keep up this drumbeat of those designations against corrupt billionaires in the days ahead. On Tuesday, we stopped the Russian government from raising money from U.S. or European investors. Now we're going to apply the same restrictions to Russia's largest state-owned.
It's just going to end up shutting down the ATMs for the normal people.
1.4 trillion.
Normal people aren't going to be able to get bank loans. It's not going to hurt the billionaires.
As we squeeze Russians' access to finances and technology for strategic sectors of its economy.
And that is the reason why there were anti-war demonstrations in Russia.
Those of our allies and partners, we estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. It will strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program. It'll hurt their ability to build ships, reducing their ability to compete economically. And it will be a major hit to Putin's long-term strategic ambitions. And we're preparing to do more. In addition to the economic penalties we're imposing, we're also taking steps to defend our NATO allies, particularly in the East. Tomorrow, NATO will convene a summit. We'll be there to bring together the leaders of 30 allied nations and close partners to affirm our solidarity and to map out the next steps we will take to further strengthen all aspects of our NATO alliance.
Okay, if NATO wasn't a thing, would this be occurring?
$1 billion in defensive assistance to Ukraine just this year, last year. Let me say it again. Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East. As I made crystal clear, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. And the good news is, NATO is more united and more determined than ever. There is no doubt that the United States and every NATO ally will meet our Article 5 commitments, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. Over the past few weeks, I ordered thousands of additional forces to Germany.
That is literally how we got World War I.
Commitment to NATO. On Tuesday, in response to Russia's aggressive action, including its troop presence in Belarus and the Black Sea, I've authorized the deployment of ground and air forces already stationed in Europe to NATO's eastern flank allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania.
History really does repeat itself.
Have also been stepping up, adding the other allies, the rest of NATO, adding their own forces and capabilities to ensure collective defense. And today, within hours of Russia's unleashing its assault, NATO came together and authorized and activated an activation of response plans. This will enable NATO's high readiness forces to deploy and when and where they are needed to protect our NATO allies on the eastern boundaries of Europe. And now I'm authorizing additional U.S. force capabilities to deploy to Germany as part of NATO's response, including some of the U.S.-based forces that the Department of Defense placed on standby weeks ago. I've also spoken with Defense Secretary Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, about preparations for additional moves should they become necessary to protect our NATO allies and support the greatest military alliance in the history of the world, NATO. As we respond, my administration is using the tools, every tool at its disposal, to protect American families and businesses from rising prices at the gas pump. You know, we're taking active steps to bring down the cost, and American oil and gas companies should not exploit this moment to hike their prices to raise profits. You know, in our sanctions package, we specifically designed to allow energy payments to continue. We are closely monitoring energy supplies for any disruption. We've been coordinating with major oil producers.
We'll still take your oil. We'll still take your gas.
To secure global energy supplies.
Germany will too.
Actively working with countries around the world to elevate collective release from the strategic petroleum reserves of major energy consuming countries. And the United States will release additional barrels of oil as conditions warrant. I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, the consequences for America would be much worse.
That could be also, you know, Putin's timing fucking with the...
This is who we are.
The election.
Let me also repeat the warning I made last week.
This coming fall.
Russia pursues cyber attacks.
Make sure that the Democrats look as bad as possible.
Infrastructure. We are prepared to respond. For months, we've been working closely with the private sector to harden their cyber defenses, sharpen our ability.
Make sure they get slaughtered in the midterms.
I spoke last night to President Zelensky of Ukraine, and I assured him that the United States, together with our allies and partners in Europe, will support the Ukrainian people as they defend their country. We'll provide humanitarian relief to ease their suffering. And in the early days...
What do you guys think? Is Ukraine going to fall?
Trying to hide the truth and claim success.
A couple of days ago, I wouldn't have thought that, but everybody's talking like that now.
It's shown time and again how swift gains in territory eventually give way to grinding occupations, acts of mass civil disobedience, and strategic dead ends. The next few weeks and months will be hard on the people of Ukraine. Putin has unleashed a great...
You're just rooting that on, warlord.
But the Ukrainian people have known 30 years of independence.
Just what you're hoping for.
Shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. This is a dangerous moment for all of Europe, for the freedom around the world. Putin has committed an assault on the very principles that uphold the global peace. But now, the entire world sees clearly what Putin and his Kremlin allies are really all about. This was never about a genuine security concerns on their part. It was always about naked aggression.
That does indeed seem to be the plan, to surround Kiev.
Necessary. By bullying Russia's neighbors through coercion and corruption, by changing borders by force, and ultimately by choosing a war without a cause. Putin's actions betray his sinister vision for the future of our world, one where nations take what they want by force. But it is a
I'm just kind of blown away about this, because I thought possible little proxy wars in these separatist regions.
The United States and our allies and
Putin was going to try to annex another little area. I didn't think he was going to take over the whole fucking country.
Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly.
And the U.S. has been sounding the alarms. Apparently, for once, the U.S. was telling the truth.
Putin will be a pariah on the international stage. Any nation.
I didn't believe him. You have no credibility, you stupid fucks.
When the history of this era is written.
Yeah, it already was a proxy war. You're right, warlord.
Make a totally unjustifiable war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. liberty, democracy, human dignity. These are the forces far more powerful than fear and oppression. They cannot be extinguished by tyrants like...
I don't know. Fear and oppression seems to be winning.
From people's hearts and hopes by any amount of violence and intimidation.
Both of those seem awfully powerful right now.
In the contest between democracy and autocracy, between sovereignty and subjugation,
autocracy seems to be winning.
Freedom will prevail. God bless the people of a free and democratic Ukraine, and may God protect our troops.
Mr. President.
Associated Press, Zeke.
Oh, he's going to take questions.
Speak with President Putin at this point, and what interactions have you had with the Russian government?
I heard the first part. Do I have any plans to speak with Putin at this point, and what?
What communications have you had with the Kremlin as far as military operations in Ukraine and making sure this does not spiral into a larger conflict?
Well, it's a large conflict already. The way we're going to ensure it's not going to aspire to a larger conflict is by providing all the forces needed in the Eastern European nations that are members of NATO. NATO is more united than it's ever been, and I have no plans to talk with Putin.
We're buffing up Poland.
Wall Street Journal, Tarina.
Mr. President, you didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that? Is there a disagreement among allies regarding SWIFT and whether Russia should be allowed to be a part of it?
The sanctions that we proposed on all their banks.
And I kind of mocked Zelensky on, what was it, Monday night? When he was calling for the U.S. to go ahead and impose sanctions.
Right now, that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take.
Sorry, dude. My apologies.
Vega, ABC.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave...
What, is he going to invade Poland?
Threat that he gave. The West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. And number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from...
He knows what he did last summer.
It has to show. This is going to take time. And we have to show resolve. So he knows what's coming. And so the people...
Not high enough for this shit.
He's brought on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh my God, these sanctions are coming. I'm going to stand down. He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together. And we will. We will, and it will impose significant costs on him.
Will he go beyond Ukraine, sir? Do you see him going beyond?
Yes.
Two topics, just really quick. First, markets are down.
What up, Deucey?
And gas prices are up. I know you always stress the difference.
Stupid son of a bitch.
Wall Street and Main Street, but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
How far are you going to bend everybody over?
That when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world.
I'm surprised Doozy hasn't done that and called him Brandon.
The notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin? And would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time,
apparently they didn't underestimate him. I was the one underestimating him.
He was worthy. I didn't underestimate him, and I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read? I shouldn't. I'm not being a wise guy. You heard the speech he made.
Yeah, you stupid son of a bitch.
Why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
And with these ambitions, you're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
Thank you, President Biden. If sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things. They're two different things. And he's going to begin to see the effect of the sanctions.
And what will that do? How will that change his mindset here, given he's
Because it
attacking
will so
Ukraine as we
weaken his
speak?
country that he'll have to make a very...
Depends on what the definition of the word sanction is.
...to move toward being a second-rate power or, in fact, respond.
You said in recent weeks that big nations cannot bluff when it comes to something like this. You recently said that the idea of personally sanctioning President Putin was on the table. Is that
I made some funny jokes about Steve Ducey's son.
Sanctioning President Putin?
Yes.
Why not sanction him today?
That's about all you missed.
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President, if I can, you detailed some severe...
Sanction him today, sanction him tomorrow.
We'll have over time, but given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done.
He got fucking mad.
Generated 2/3 of the world joining us. They are profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month.
Do not insult the size of Joe Biden's sanctions.
Spoke to Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, sir.
What's the risk that we are watching the beginning of another Cold War, and is there now a complete rupture in U.S. and Russian relations?
I thought it's a hot war now.
U.S.-Russian relations, if they continue on this path that they're on. And in terms of a Cold War...
Oh, we're cold.
The vast majority of the rest of the world in total opposition to what he's doing. From Asia to South America to Europe to around the world. And so it's going to be a cold day for Russia. The idea, you don't see a whole lot of people coming to his...
I bet it is cold in Russia.
Are you, if I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to...
It's February 24th in Russia right now.
Russia?
I'm not prepared to...
Maybe it's the 25th. I don't fucking know.
No. Yeah. No. He's had his hand up a long time.
Thank you, Mr. President. How concerned are you that Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine into...
Hey, it's 28 degrees in Russia.
If he moves into NATO.
We've been there here in Alabama, so like I can't.
The only thing that
I can't bitch on 28 degrees.
He'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now,
we'll get up to a high of like 35 tomorrow.
He will be emboldened. Look, every well, anyway.
Can you talk anything more about your conversation?
He's wrapping it up. Why is he smiling so big?
Why not sanction Putin directly today?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
Does the Defense Department of the United States...
Sir, India is one of your major defense partners. Is India fully in sync with the United States on Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
One more question.
Okay, thank you all very much.
I don't know. Modi seems like he would be sympathetic to Putin.
President Biden.
I don't know that to be fact, though.
After announcing new sanctions in response to Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian troops' attack on Ukraine. The American president saying Putin has chosen a war without a cause. Now, the president pledged that America and its allies will emerge more powerful and united through this. He also issued a warning.
Apparently, there has never been any kind of sanctions that targeted Putin himself.
An equal.
That's what we were hearing from the Washington Post before
Many questions from the press corps range.
Biden spoke.
Response of
The fuck indeed.
and India to just how far these sanctions truly go and how much they will hurt. Let's head to Hannah Jewell now outside the White House. Our national video reporter can talk
What up, Hannah?
about the highlights of the president's remarks. Hannah?
So, Libby, we heard Biden call this a brutal assault and, as you said, a war without a cause. And we got an outline of the new level of sanctions that
Well, I think Putin has a cause. We've gone over this.
in tandem with its allies.
He
Those
wants to reunite the Soviet Union.
to Russia.
He spoke very poetically about that.
To, as well as defense, limiting Russian access to dollars, euros, pound system, blocking finance to Russian military.
I don't know how you can actually target Putin directly because, like, I feel like he's got money everywhere. Did we learn that from the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers?
And cutting off $1 trillion in assets from the U.S. financial system and Russia between
Putin and his buddies were a big part of those reveals.
He kept stressing that this would take time. He said actually to a reporter asking a question, like, come back and ask me in a month if you think this is working.
Will Ukraine be a country in a month? This is blowing my mind.
Focused on how devastating he thought that these sanctions would be. He was asked about why he has not explicitly cut off Russia from SWIFT, why there's been no announcement of that, cutting off Russia from the international banking system.
I've been mocking all the shit the U.S. has been saying.
Do that and said that his package of sanctions was in fact, by his words,
He's very nostalgic for the Soviet bloc.
commitment to Article 5 of the NATO treaties said that NATO allies would be meeting tomorrow and that an attack on a NATO ally.
As I've said, it's more complicated than what we make it out to be because, like, there are pockets that are sympathetic to Russia.
If there were a further attack on a NATO allied country to the U.S. in the East. And he also really stressed that these sanctions are designed to maximize impact on Russia, he said, and minimize effects on the U.S. and allies. He said that he knew that Americans were feeling the so-called pain at the gas pump. But of course, in this very interconnected world, there is always...
Which means they're still letting their oil come to market.
...insulate Americans from what is happening in Europe.
Hannah Jewell, thank you so much. The president speaking to an audience of many with a lot of...
This is what I was worried about. Is going to be sanctions that is going to fuck up the Russian economy.
Give us a sense of how intensive these...
Fuck the Russian people.
How much bite do they have?
Not actually do anything to prevent Putin or his pals.
Exactly what Treasury is doing, and he name-checked only a couple of things. But if he really is
being able to operate,
largest bank, and he's really sanctioning the VTB, which he did name check, and that the total market capitalization of all of these is over $1 trillion. That is serious. Russia's GDP is only about 1.5 trillion a year. And so you're talking about a serious number of assets there that, especially if he's sanctioning the Sberbank level VTB, if Gazprom Bank is in the mix, that will...
So I would assume that the U.S.'s position now is like, hopefully these sanctions cripple them, they pull back, they do not go for Kiev.
I mean, look, SWIFT is kind of like the last little drops of cutting Russia off from the banking system.
What happens if they take Kiev?
Transactions denominated in dollars, pounds, euros, and everybody's in lockstep on that. It's a very rare institution that's going to say, actually, I kind of feel like it anyway. And that's really the very last little bits that SWIFT would cut. So Biden was right when he's talking about how the impact here is in the banking sector sanctions. I would have liked to have heard a few more details, and I'm sure my colleagues are reporting this as we speak, about what the export controls that you referenced are going to be, because it depends on what industry, it depends on what scope those are. Those could do as much damage to the Russian economy.
Well, we were seeing widespread protests
in some ways as the banking
against the war in Moscow. We had a live shot up when we first came on from Reuters.
Sanctions are serious.
It was shut down. There were mass arrests in Moscow.
Why Putin wasn't personally being...
And the live feed got shut down after about 40 minutes of broadcasting.
Is in line, I suppose, with what we've been hearing from officials across the board.
And that would have been like 7:30, 8 o'clock Russian time.
But again, I think that the details of those export controls, which I'm sure we'll be learning momentarily.
I'm not usually hitting the bong this early in the day.
To hit Russia in the gut.
I usually save the bong for usually the first time I hit the bong is on the regular troll patrol.
More tightly
What
bound
up,
to
Zoot?
their defense apparatus, to their intelligence apparatus.
But I mean, anytime Biden's speaking, you gotta take some Biden bong rips.
Donbass, or whether we're going to see something that is much more of a broad sort of backhand against Russia's connections to the entire global marketplace.
Great things to point out, Karin, and great questions to ask. Let's go to Paul Soni next, who covers national security as well. Paul, let's dig in a little more to what
I'm still interested in the timing, because wouldn't Putin have had an easier time doing this
can the United States
with Trump in power?
Do?
I think the problem that the Biden administration faces here is that it was very, very clear.
Did that play into Trump's decision to want to pull all the troops back from it? Not that I disagree with pulling all the troops out of every fucking where all across the world.
When they're unpredicted, both on the target in terms of the.
But I mean, I thought was that so that we wouldn't be in any position to assist Ukraine?
You saw there in the press corps, people were not satisfied.
The cat wanting to go outside. It must be looking at least
against Russia. People are not satisfied.
Slightly nice out there.
Already signaled this, and there's no surprise there that makes people feel like, wow, Russia is really getting a punishment that wasn't expected.
So there was a question by reporters about the role of sanctions, right? The threat of the sanctions sort of being the warning versus the
absolutely. Called him a genius.
Will reap the consequences, and that
Trump
is now
called Putin a genius.
Behavior of Vladimir Putin and his allies. Paul, can you give us a sense of what the Biden administration
for his moves on the separatist regions,
and in terms of how?
That's why I'm saying, it would have been a lot easier under the Trump administration for Putin to pull this off. It's almost like a big dick.
I would say
fucking
this
sucks.
Anticipated entirely by the Russians, and they would have baked this into their calculus before rolling tanks over the border.
Stop, buddy. He's trying to get one of my hair ties.
One of the problems that you face in trying to deter.
But it's almost like it's a big dick move on Putin's part to do it under Biden. Like, U.S., what you gonna do, huh?
He needs to solve for whatever reason, whether that's his historical revisionism.
He's trying to fuck with my headphone cord now.
You're not gonna.
What the hell, dude? What the hell?
Just by nature of his government and his place in the world and his place within Russia, I think
no, you can't get on the board.
Hard to ask, and there's a lot of literature on sanctions and their effectiveness, and they can be effective when you're trying.
Get down, buddy.
For example, a certain program within a country, but where the
I don't have any masks for you to play with up here.
World, and also where that program is maybe not 100% central to the rationale of the leader.
He's standing in front of the monitor that I'm always watching. I used to watch this monitor, but then I realized I was looking the opposite direction.
Against the West, he is willing to suffer great
on screen, so I changed to looking at this monitor.
Back into Moscow's sphere of influence.
So it looks like I'm looking at the video while I'm watching the monitor, but he's in front of my monitor.
Let's bring in James Homan to the conversation. James, I'd like to get any more input you have.
What's up, James Human?
American warnings.
This guy's knowledgeable. I like him an awful lot.
President Biden did address the question of just how aggressive Russia could be, not just in terms of Ukraine or even other countries in the region, but globally in terms of cyber and attacks that Russia could launch on the United States, even in that way.
Yeah, absolutely, Libby. And to tack on to Paul's great points, the problem is that Russia cares far more about Ukraine than the United States cares about Ukraine, because they see it, Putin sees it as part of his sphere.
I would assume.
It was really striking, putting aside the sanctions part of it. That was the firmest commitment we've seen from President Biden to the U.S. following through on its Article 5 commitments. It was our colleague, the Post's Tyler Pager, who asked the president there at the end, do you expect Putin to go further than Ukraine? Biden saying yes, and reiterating his commitment essentially to go to war with Russia if Putin attacks members of NATO. Here I have the map. The NATO countries are in green. You can see Russia here in yellow, stretching from the U.S. up here all the way over. President Biden not just sending reinforcements to Poland, but also
it does not look yellow to me at all.
Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Basically saying the U.S. is preparing for spillover, preparing for this to escalate. It's a dramatic statement for an American president to make, but it was also, very decisive, very clear that the U.S. isn't going to tolerate a move beyond Ukraine. The other point, Libby, that you mentioned, which was really striking, was President Biden saying everything's on the table vis-a-vis cyber security, cyber attacks. The president said that the U.S. has been hardening its own cyber defenses over the last year. One of the concerns is we've already seen Russia attacking Ukraine's cyber defenses.
Well, I would assume we had no fucking cyber defense the entire time Trump was in office.
Websites. There's some
I'm sure we need to get a lot harder.
Over, just because Ukrainian networks are connected to other countries in the region. And NATO has said that a cyber attack on a NATO member could constitute an attack that could lead to the invocation of Article 5. That doesn't necessarily mean full-scale conventional war, but there are risks. And one of the things that has been baked into U.S. calculations about sanctions is, will Vladimir Putin try to shut down power plants in the United States, which he has the capability to do? Will he try to shut down pipelines here? And if he does, how will the U.S. respond? And this is what could lead to that cycle of escalation. But very strong words from the president about what he's willing to do. And also, it's worth keeping in mind that this was tranche 2. He didn't call it that, but earlier this week he said this is tranche 1. We're cutting off these banks. Now there's tranche 2. Tranche 3, he has left some things in reserve. He could personally sanction Putin. Didn't rule it out. Said it's still on the table. He still could move.
Why wouldn't that be the first fucking thing you do?
Acknowledged during that Q&A with reporters that the reason.
Oh, he could sanction Putin.
Of European objections.
He left that on the table.
Russia starts to be more aggressive. If they move hard into the West, if they threaten Poland, that is the kind of step that could be in tranche 3.
Let's listen to some of President Biden's remarks. The president announced these sanctions that he
No, I can't do it. No, we just heard his remarks. This is the live shot from Kiev. That's much better than hearing Biden again. I tried to sign up for Truth Social. Only on iPhones at the moment. I wonder if it's only on iPhones and it's going to have like some major security issues once they put it out on like Androids and shit. But they're using iPhone right now just to mask like the fucking coming wave of cyber attacks, of hacks. It's gonna go down. It's gonna go down in flames. These are anti-war protests in Times Square. We did have live shots from the protests in Moscow, but Putin shut those down. Truth Social with CEO Devin Nunes. It just launched, last week in its beta phase? It's already had several problems. Devin Nunes resigned from Congress to be the CEO. 9/11 inside jab. Thank you for being a freaking follower. 9/11 inside jab. Ah! I don't like that it said job in the closed captioning. I said jab. no. That's Jeb. With the exclamation point. Jeb. It's so close. It's so close to fucking presidential time. They're gonna start announcing right after the midterm who's running. This time 2 years from now, I'm gonna be broadcasting for like primary season. We're gonna be on all the fucking time. In a way, I'm ready for it. As a political streamer, I'm ready for it. American citizen, I'm so not ready for it. Even as a political streamer and something that would not be in my own best interest, I advocate that we have, designated time periods for campaigns. They should only be like a month for the general, a month for the primary. You're not allowed to fucking campaign outside of that fucking month because it's too fucking much. Late stage capitalism, something I fucking love. The whole campaign season. Fucking capitalism fucking ruins it. I hope you're alive 2 years from now, RB. I assume I will be, but I might choke on something or have a heart attack. Those are the two. If you find out, like if somebody says I committed suicide or I OD'd, no, the cops are lying about me. If you hear that I committed suicide or I OD'd, the cops are lying about me. If I died, it was a heart attack or I choked on something, that's legit. They say I died of autoerotic asphyxiation. Nope. They're framing me. That didn't happen. I don't like pain. I'm not choking myself to get an orgasm. I can get an orgasm just fine. Many other ways. The odds of me ODing are just like astronomically low. Because, like, one, I don't do any fucking hard drugs anymore. Two, if I was to do hard drugs, I'm the dude that's coaching everybody through their dosing, reminding them to take water and shit. Not likely to OD. And I'm a pussy. I'm scared to death of dying. I would never kill myself. My own mortality it haunts me constantly. So if you find out autoerotic asphyxiation, OD, or suicide, I have been framed, never fucking happened. I will die by choking on something here alone in my apartment and nobody being able to help me. Or having a heart attack. Nobody being here to help me. Cats aren't gonna do anything. Come on. They'll eat my face off if they get hungry enough. What are we gonna talk about tonight on the Troll Patrol? Fucking war. What else is there to talk about? I got Maynard peeking his head over here on the desk. He, like, fucking Socks don't like him. Don't fuck with Socks, buddy. No, don't fuck with Socks, buddy. No. Socks don't want you to fuck with him. He just wants to be left alone over there in his space. You don't get to go fuck with him. Now I got this one over here. Apparently they put in a new thermostat and it's Wi-Fi and everything, so now I can hook it up to my Google. Hey. Make Google automatically turn down the temperature when I go to bed. Fuck yeah. I used to be really against giving corporations my data. But like I watched a documentary about like the next industrial revolution. It's about how like we're gonna have to give up our data in order to have like these next great advancements in society. And I'm like, oh, fuck it. Here, Google, you can know everything about me at all times. Shut the fuck up. I didn't have... Sparkle said she sassed her. And my Google sassed her last time she was here. She got into a fight with Google, and like I heard her in there arguing with it. Do I need to give you guys an animal video before I wrap up? I should probably go do some real work. Before, you know, I put the work into doing... Been a little checked out. Kind of weird to do a nightly news show and being a little checked out on the news. I'll go through downtimes, though. I think I got that seasonal depression shit, and it's still fucking cold here. I don't like it. I don't like it being cold. It was supposed to be 70 degrees today. I was looking forward to having the doors open. It didn't get 70 degrees. Even the cats are fucking acting weird because they're all cooped up. I don't like this shit. I'm not normally on at this time. I gotta take a look at the list to see who's on. I can even raid. Oh, that's perfect. Watching on Twitch, we're going to go say hey to USA Hole. I will be back tonight. What time am I on? 8 p.m. Eastern. 8 p.m. Eastern. 5 Pacific. Troll Patrol Live. Not high enough for this shit.